This video contains spoilers, so I recommend watching the film first. Although I will be trying my best to break down the plot for those that aren't interested in watching it. Possession is a psychological horror film directed by Andrzej Żuławski, with a budget of $2.4 million USD and shot on a 12-week schedule. The film first premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 1981 as one of the most controversial entries that year. Possession failed to become a box office hit and landed itself in hot water, effectively banned from the UK for its apparently obscene content containing so-called video nasties. And the reception of Possession was even worse once it reached the US in 1983. Because of its notoriety, the runtime for the film was significantly cut for the American release, deviating significantly from the director's intended vision. However, since then, Possession has gone on to garner a cult following. And once again, you don't have to agree with any interpretation presented in the video, and due to the interpretative nature of the film, you may even find most of these interpretations conflicting or contradictory. The contents of the film and the discussion in this video will get rather disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. In a nutshell, Possession revolves around a married couple, Mark and Anna, played by Sam Neill and Isabelle Adjani respectively. Set in West Berlin, husband Mark is returning home after carrying out a covert espionage mission, where his wife Anna informs him of his crumbling marriage. She wants a divorce. As a result, the film at its core is a film about divorce, or the disintegration of a marriage. This sets off a cascade of events getting stranger and more sinister as the film progresses, with the codependent couple descending into madness as they reveal themselves to be more deeply disturbed and increasingly unhinged. But the film is built around more than just the topic of divorce. Politics is another theme central to Possession. Firstly, in the context of marriage politics, and secondly, in regards to geopolitics. Throughout the film, the camera work emphasizes the mental state of the characters and the state of their relationship. The often erratic and restless camera movements can speak for Anna and Mark's tumultuous, unstable, and frankly exhausting marriage. Meanwhile, the close-ups are suffocating and claustrophobic, constantly circling the characters, perhaps to emphasize their physical and mental confinement. This feeling of being trapped features prominently for the duration of the film, whether this is of Mark's trapping emotional abuse, obsession and controlling behaviour exhibited towards Anna, a feeling which extends to the character's need to perform a specific role in society, or the trapping of their young son Bob in the middle of their mess. And as much as there is a sense of the characters being trapped, the widely filmed empty spaces bring attention to the film's oozing isolation and decay, as seen in the peeling wallpaper or the neglect of their young son Bob. The director also introduces other techniques, such as constantly situating Mark and Anna on opposite sides of the frame. This lends itself to the theme of separation, of disconnect, which is present from the opening. In the opening, a shot along the Berlin Wall establishes the setting. If you're unfamiliar with the socio-political context, briefly put, the Berlin Wall was built in 1961 by the German Democratic Republic, commonly known as East Germany, and stood until its fall in 1989. For context, Possession was made 8 years before the fall. To elaborate, following World War II, the four powers, or the victorious Allies, established occupation zones in Germany. These being the Soviets in the east and the Americans, British and French occupying the west. And by 1949, two new Germanys, East and West, had been officially founded. Whilst West Germany was viewed as free and prosperous, its Soviet-dominated counterpart East Germany was racked with poverty and labour strikes. As a result, East Germans, many seeking to improve their living conditions, began fleeing en masse to West Germany, especially through a more permeable border via West Berlin. By 1961, approximately 3 million East Germans had migrated to West Germany. This movement prompted a brain drain and shortage of young and skilled workers in East Germany, which prompted the GDR to answer this existential threat by building the Berlin Wall one morning of August 1961. In the film's establishing shot of the wall, graffiti is scrawled along the stone. It writes, "The wall must go," a popular East German slogan. The wall is a central motif which haunts the film, appearing in the background of many shots. Firstly, as alluded to, the wall could be a metaphor for division and separation, and by extension, serve to visually reflect the mounting wall between Mark and Anna, which leads to the disintegration of the couple's marriage. So not only is there an invisible wall dividing the couple through their stilted dialogue and framing, but this is fortified by the haunting visual of the Berlin Wall, which runs along like a concrete scar. The couple are also divided by their respective secret lives. As we soon learn, Anna's secret life revolves around two affairs and the torment of her inner life. On the other hand, Mark's secret life is centered around his work as a spy. But the wall doesn't just serve to separate the couple, it also circles back to the feeling of being trapped. Thus, an alternate reading is that the wall could signify a desire to escape. But no matter where you escape, at least in Berlin, the grass is always greener on the other side. As Mark later remarks, when you're there you want to be home, and when you're home you want to be there. Set in the Cold War era, the film can double as a personification of the final years of the international conflict. As a result, despite the mass migration between 1949 and 1961, the atmosphere was fraught with paranoia. Running parallel to Mark and Anna's relationship, neither side of the Berlin Wall could fully trust the other, leading to a growing rift between those that believed in the economic systems, communism versus capitalism, of their respective sides. Having returned home from a work trip to West Berlin, Mark is greeted by a frosty Anna. Instead of embracing him, she stands awkwardly, arms crossed. Their marriage is like a Cold War. Mark picks up and puts down his luggage 3 times, heightening this awkward tension and the push and pull nature of their relationship, which defines the film. Anna wants the divorce, but Mark is determined to keep their marriage together, especially for their young son Bob, who we then see playing innocently in the bath. In our first introduction to the couple's apartment and their son, Bob imitates the sound of emergency sirens, foreshadowing what is to come. Sleeping side by side, the couple question each other on whether the other has been unfaithful, to which Anna denies and Mark answers, not really. The scene then transitions from their relatively cramped apartment to a much larger and empty office where Mark is being questioned by his employers, who ask,
"Does our subject still wear pink socks?"
Once again, the use of space and location makes the character feel trapped yet simultaneously isolated or forgotten. Aside from this political subtext, you should also be aware that there is an autobiographical element to Possession. At the time of writing Possession, the director was embroiled in a messy divorce with a Polish actress, and the star of his first 2 films. Consequently, the film is often read as an allegory for divorce, and due to government censorship of his second film, The Devil, Żuławski was ordered to leave his native Poland. As such, it is apt that Possession, according to a scholar whose name I'm going to butcher, so I'm just going to put it up on screen, whilst the wall does visualise a disintegrating country, the very fact that the film takes place in Cold War era West Berlin is quite significant for not only the metaphor of divorce, with the wall that separates it from East Berlin being a symbol of disconnection of what was once united, but the director's additional intention may have been for the Berlin Wall to symbolise the Iron Curtain and for Germany to symbolise Poland. Mark returns from the comically empty office to an empty apartment. Anna is nowhere to be found. In a role reversal, Mark, a spy, is now being watched himself and waits for his wife in the same way she waited for him. Mark searches for clues from their shared bookshelf, finding a postcard marked from the Taj Mahal. The postcard is from Anna's lover, confirmed by Anna on the phone, a man by the name of Heinrich. It reads, "I have seen one half of the face of God, the other half is you." Mark then calls Margie, Anna's only friend, who confesses to Anna's affair. She mentions the magic wand metaphor, in which Anna wishes she can simply wave a magic wand to solve all of her problems with Mark. Mark then receives a call from Anna, which causes him to rock violently in a rocking chair, which could be symbolic of their rocky relationship, especially as Anna is divulging in the details of her affair with Heinrich. This is the first image of Mark's fraught relationship with chairs. Mark asks Anna to meet at Café Einstein, which brings logic to the dysfunction and order in their relationship. During their confrontation at the cafe, Anna and Mark mirror each other's poses but refuse to face each other. A divided city frames a divided family. Anna sits at a 90-degree angle from Mark. Subsequently, the dualism of the wall is reflected in these scenes, where the pair constantly appear on opposing sides of the frame and rarely make eye contact. Neither of them really care or prioritize their son, but the two discuss their access to Bob. The conversation sours quickly and the couple's argument devolves from shouting match to physical fight, in which Mark's relationship with chairs is exposed again. Mark chases Anna whilst throwing and breaking dining chairs. The film then cuts to Mark in a hotel room, unshaven, clutched in a fetal position, and having gone on a drinking binge. After some time, Mark is able to collect himself and returns to the couple's shared apartment. There he is horrified to find Bob, situated in the midst of their failing marriage, abandoned, covered in condiment stains, and surrounded by mess. Wound up in their own problems, Anna in particular often leaves their son unattended, and therefore neglected. Bob highlights the oftentimes forgotten difficulties suffered by children either in the turmoil of their parents' divorce or within a toxic relationship, and how they are collateral damage. And whilst Mark appears to have more sense, vowing to take better care of Bob, he only winds up playing games of emergency with him instead. Bob then brings out a sailboat given to him by Anna's affair partner, Heinrich. At this point, Mark and Anna have reversed roles again, Mark taking care of Bob in their shared home whilst Anna disappears again. We then see Mark rocking violently in his chair once more, as Anna enters through the door holding bags of shopping. Trying to keep their perfect family unit together, Mark tries to convince Anna to break it off with Heinrich by issuing an ultimatum. It appears that keeping intact the traditional nuclear family is a priority for Mark. But before he can work on repairing this dynamic, he finds that Anna has mysteriously vanished again. Mark calls Heinrich, for this call to be picked up by presumably Heinrich's mother. She ominously informs him that she hasn't seen Anna in weeks. If Anna is neither with Heinrich nor her friend Margie, where could she be? In Anna's absence, Mark takes Bob to school where he meets his teacher Helen. To our and Mark's surprise, Helen, played by the same actress, is near identical to Anna, her physical doppelganger. In this initial interaction, Mark even mistakes Helen for his wife.
I'm glad. You're the father who went far away and made the polar bears.
What is this, a joke?
What are you talking about?
I mean...
Mark then visits Heinrich looking for his wife. Heinrich invites Mark into his home in an attempt to bond, but Mark seeks only confrontation. It's clear from their conversation that Heinrich represents, at least to Anna, an ideal or perfect lover. He's, to a certain extent, patient, accepting of Anna, able to achieve perfect harmony with her sexually, and doesn't seek to control or possess her. We can also infer from his home that he's also rather wealthy. Heinrich gives Mark an answer he's been searching for. His affair with Anna has been going on for a year. However, Heinrich isn't as enlightened or spiritual as he believes himself to be. His speech about accepting Anna's ways, making himself out to be the bigger man after he slept with another man's wife, comes across like an attempt to justify his affair with Anna, and rationalize his continued occupation of a moral high ground. Ultimately, his actions were narcissistic and selfish. He even sleeps with Anna despite his mother being around all the time, clearly demonstrating a lack of real care. It brings us back to the dichotomy visualized by the wall. Here it can reflect Anna's position being torn between her two egotistical lovers, Mark and Heinrich, which in turn, like the wall, threatens to tear a family apart. Heinrich then bests Mark with ease. Mark then returns home to find Anna and Bob having a blissful conversation in the kitchen. But Anna, who appears maternal in this moment, becomes tense, sensing that Mark has entered the apartment. Mark proceeds to question Anna about her serial disappearances, which she can't account for. This culminates in Anna claiming Mark now disgusts her. Anna slaps Mark during their confrontation. Mark asks Anna to do it again, which causes her to smile. I take this as both of them being drawn to and finding the toxicity in their relationship alluring or amusing. The scene gives us glimpses into why Anna is no longer happy in her marriage, despite her inability to explain this to Mark. For instance, Anna reaches for the door, which prompts Mark to escalate the quarrel to domestic abuse. Mark therefore demonstrates himself to be the embodiment of toxic masculinity. So not only is Mark flawed in his inability to listen to or validate his wife's feelings, perceiving her as merely an object or a possession, one of Mark's first resorts is to yell and escalate to violence. Anna finally escapes from the apartment but is chased down by Mark. She then walks away as though she has been possessed. Following this, Mark meets with Margie, who tries to seduce him. The film then cuts to Mark's meeting with a man named Zimmermann. Mark spins restlessly again in a chair. He explains to Zimmermann that he wishes to hire a private investigator to follow Anna on her mysterious outings. It's also ironic that Mark, a professional spy, would need to hire a private eye to tail his own wife. Later that night, after Mark has put Bob to sleep, Margie attempts to seduce Mark again, and it's hinted that there is something intimate going on with the pair. In the morning, Anna returns to the apartment to grind meat with an electric knife. After Mark grills Anna over her affair with Heinrich, Anna decides to take the knife to her neck. As Anna bleeds, Mark quickly resumes his role of nurturer. This is something Mark continually does. His actions towards Anna and Bob, helping them get undressed and tucking them into bed, are the same. In a way, Mark infantilizes and nurtures Anna as though she's a child. Mark returns back to the kitchen and decides to place the grinder superficially to his arm. He bleeds but appears to be in no pain. Anna tells Mark it doesn't hurt. Carving flesh is only skin deep. Their self-mutilation, like the reason many people do, serves as a coping mechanism, dulling or distracting themselves from their deteriorating psyches. As Sharon Gissy puts it, hurting themselves with a meat grinder does not hurt as much as their conversation just did. For those that have experienced heartache, the emotional pain is often greater than the physical. Next, we find Anna is being tailed by a private detective by the name of Emmanuel. Despite his obvious tactics, Anna doesn't seem to notice his presence. He follows her onto a subway, shopping bags again in hand. Anna's journey leads them to a dilapidated apartment. We see repetition of dualism, as reflected in the opposing sides of the Berlin Wall. This time, the dichotomy is present in the homes shown. On one hand, the married couple live in a modern, so-called new construction apartment, which also literally overlooks the wall into East Berlin, allowing its presence to intrude on the couple's space. On the other hand, the couple's West Berlin apartment is contrasted against the abandoned, ruined apartments on the other side of the wall, where Anna is discovered to be visiting this second, secret apartment. The rundown building can serve as a visual metaphor for Anna and Mark's rotting relationship. Arriving at Anna's door, Emmanuel rings her doorbell. He makes up a maintenance excuse to enter and search the apartment. When it's clear Emmanuel has no intention to leave and he's about to unravel her secret, Anna drops a wine bottle. Emmanuel opens the door to a dark room only to find she's been housing what is credited as simply the creature. At this stage, the creature, an octopoid monster, is still small and nestled into the wall, perhaps reminiscent of a woman's genitals. Upon being exposed to this revelation, Anna claims the life of Emmanuel by attacking him with the broken wine bottle. The film cuts to another shot of Bob in the bathtub. Helen stops by their apartment looking for Anna, to which Mark explains that she isn't living with them anymore. Mark invites Helen in to see Bob instead. As Helen plays with Bob, Heinrich shows up to probe Mark about Anna's whereabouts. Mark takes pleasure in revealing there is a third party, the creature. Whilst Bob imitates siren sounds, Heinrich tells Mark,
"There's nothing to fear except God, whatever that means to you."
This is the first implication that the creature, Anna's third option, is a divine entity. Mark retorts that,
"For me, God is a disease."
In the film, Heinrich's superficial beliefs reflect a sense of longing for salvation or deliverance. His response, "Through disease we can reach God," encapsulates this longing for transcendence and meaning amidst the turmoil of their existence. However, their attempts to find meaning through their created philosophies are distorted. Instead of bringing enlightenment or solace, these philosophies only lead to further destruction and chaos. The theme of distorted spiritual yearning is symbolic of the broader conflict depicted in Possession, the clash between the Christian capitalist West and the godless communist East. As such, the character's futile search for deliverance mirrors the societal tensions and ideological struggles at the time, where both Western and Eastern ideologies were portrayed as flawed and incapable of providing true salvation. After Helen reads Bob a bedtime story, Mark has a private conversation with Bob, where he asks his son, "Who do you think is prettier?" referring to Helen and Anna. Bob answers his mother, to which Mark agrees. An interpretation of this is that despite resembling his wife, attraction is subjective. Helen and Anna may look the same, but Mark is still attracted to the toxicity of Anna. We then find Helen in the kitchen, cleansing or symbolically purifying the electric knife. This is yet another doubling, which echoes the previous scene of Anna and Mark's self-mutilation. Both women say "excuse me," but Anna's screams are juxtaposed next to Helen's gentle requests. Mark confesses to her that he's at war with women. Helen tells him that there is nothing in common among women except menstruation. Despite her firm opposition, Helen's responses are never cruel and are always reasonable or tempered. Compared to his interactions with Anna, Mark seems to respect Helen, her autonomy and individual agency, probably because he doesn't view her yet as his possession. She goes on to explain that she comes from a place where evil seems easier to pinpoint because you can see it in the flesh. I'll touch on what this could imply later. Mark proceeds to embark on an affair of his own with Helen, though in this instance it appears that he only sleeps next to her. Bob wakes Mark by screaming at night, having inherited the trauma of his family's dysfunction. This causes Helen to leave. The next morning, after Mark drops Bob off awkwardly at school, Zimmermann approaches and questions Mark about the disappearance of the private investigator, Emmanuel. Zimmermann reveals that he is in a homosexual relationship with Emmanuel. Going to the address Mark gave him, Zimmermann finds Anna at the second apartment scrubbing the floor. Zimmermann approaches a room where the creature gestates. The creature has grown in size. The first thing Zimmermann says when he sees it is, "My God," perhaps a second reference that the creature is divine in nature. Anna reveals that she had been intimate with the creature. Having won 2 Academy Awards on Alien and E.T., special effects artist Carlo Rambaldi was tasked with the urgent need to complete the creature. When the director first saw Rambaldi's monster, he was unimpressed. Rambaldi had been advised that the creature was supposed to be a sexual symbol, to which the director responded, "This is not a symbol. You made the thing. It's as if I filmed you without your underwear." So it turns out, aside from Heinrich, Anna's not just visiting this third party, but she's also having an active affair with this bloody and oily monster, which appears to excrete blood and milk. By having intercourse with it, the creature has not only entered Anna but also possessed her, compelling her to do its murderous bidding whilst neglecting her husband and son. What's worse is that it's implied Anna has given birth to the creature, which makes their relationship incestuous and Oedipal, especially as the monster, her child, grows to resemble Mark. What this creature is open for interpretation. There are hints that the creature could be God, a divine entity, an alien, a twisted version of God, the devil, and Antichrist, or something else entirely. The creature, which previously nestled in the wall, reminiscent of yonic imagery, is simultaneously phallic in form, with the shape of its elongating head. Its bloody, rotting flesh resembles both the inside of a womb and a child covered in natal fluids. As a result, the creature appears to have mixed gendered characteristics as a male-female hybrid. Being possessed by the creature, it can be implied that Anna replicates some of its features, as seen later when she excretes and ejects milk and blood herself, thus transferring monstrous qualities to her female body, transforming Anna into the monstrous feminine and by extension implying that female anatomy, femininity, and maternity are naturally monstrous, through assigning natural feminine functions like menstrual bleeding and lactation to this monstrosity. It's apt then that after Zimmermann screams out Emmanuel's name, Anna would beat him with a jar of white liquid which appears to be milk before shooting him. Possession makes use of framing horror erupting from an ordinary domestic setting with household items such as the electric knife, the milk jar, and the wine bottle recruited for weaponry. For someone that has rejected motherhood, it's ironic to learn that Anna has been nurturing a creature which she'd killed to protect. Anna doesn't just kill the private investigators because they are hindrances to her relationship with Mark, but like all homicides in the film, Zimmermann and Emmanuel's homosexual relationship threatens the heterosocial order. This appears to be a common theme for the film, wherein both Anna and Mark seem drawn to this preservation of the nuclear family model, leading them to the destruction of anything which threatens the heteronormative reproductive capability. Mark receives a package, a film shot by Heinrich. The first part of this film depicts Anna tormenting a student as she contorts her body to perfection. This contortion and her general occupation as a ballet teacher can signify that Anna has an unsustainable need for a perfect balance. After sadistically forcing this particular girl into a pose, Anna turns her attention to another student but chooses to give her praise instead. This breaks the first student, causing her to leave while sobbing at Anna's misplaced affection. Having lost her perfect balance of faith and chance, Anna launches into delivering an extended monologue expressing her thoughts. She says,
Because you say I for me.
Which is seemingly directed to both Heinrich, who is filming, and now Mark, who watches on a projector in his rocking chair.
Because you say I for me.
It can be interpreted as Anna's revelation that Mark and Heinrich, her two egotistical lovers, say I for her, as in their attempts to speak for her in order to control and bend her towards their will. In the second part of her monologue, Anna introduces a concept of two sisters, Sister Faith and Sister Chance, two opposing forces within herself, or a split within her psyche. Anna utters,
It's like those two sisters of faith and chance. My faith can exclude chance, but my chance can explain faith. My faith didn't allow me to wait for chance, and chance didn't give me enough faith.
Sister Faith can represent belief, hope, and a sense of order or stability in the universe, while Sister Chance may embody randomness, chaos, and unpredictability. Because of Anna's internal struggle, she has essentially separated parts of herself into these two competing impulses, which battle for dominance. One interpretation of this splitting is that Anna is trying to absolve herself from the guilt of the bad things she does. It has also been posited by David West that Chance is the sister that allows her to act so cruelly to her husband, while Faith is the sister that causes her to feel guilty for doing so and to entertain the possibility of repairing her marriage. So when Anna says,
My faith can exclude chance,
it could be that Anna is suggesting that people can't rely entirely on faith, as blind faith is not enough to address the harsh reality that some things will be left to chance, as in chaos and unfairness will still exist in the world. For instance, what led to Anna meeting Heinrich was a result of this chaos. They met by chance. She then says,
but my chance can explain faith.
Suggesting that there is a reciprocal relationship between chance and faith. Chance can't fully comprehend or explain the depth of faith. For instance, despite the unpredictability and chaos of their relationship, Anna still retains faith or hope that she can resolve her marital issues with Mark. Anna goes on to say,
My faith didn't allow me to wait for a chance,
which could be suggesting that her strong belief in faith or hope made her act too quickly without waiting for chance to play its part. For example, Anna impulsively decides to leave Mark because of her faith, possibly faith in a better future and faith in a positive outcome, without waiting for the chance that Mark might want to discuss their issues and therefore wait for a chance of reconciliation. Instead, she chose to embark on an affair with Heinrich. Anna is too overconfident in Faith's ability to control outcomes, as she may believe that everything will work out positively without considering the potential consequences. She then says,
And chance didn't give me enough faith.
which could mean that conversely the unpredictability and randomness of chance left her too disillusioned or uncertain and didn't give her the level of faith or hope she desired. Anna then expresses her wish to reject her preordained roles in social order and that she seeks a greater existence. Anna refuses to conform to societal expectations. She wants more than being seen as fitting into a conventional societal role as a wife, mother, or lover. She wants to be something beyond this norm. She seeks a third possibility that transcends social expectations, aiming to pierce reality by breaking free from conventional constraints. Anna recognizes her need for dependence on others, saying,
I can't exist by myself because I'm afraid of myself.
Her relationships with Mark, Heinrich, and her creation of the creature illustrate her struggle between dependence and independence. The creation of the creature represents a compromise, allowing her to rely on something entirely of her own making while maintaining a degree of autonomy, the literal making of her own evil. The creation can therefore more broadly symbolize her rejection of societal norms, conventional morality, and emancipation from the masculine order. In this monologue, Anna also challenges the traditional Western perception of good and evil by suggesting that evil is the true pure reality, and good merely exists as an extension of evil. This concept reverses the conventional understanding that evil corrupts good, asserting instead that good is a reflection upon evil, which, according to West, serves as the crux of her argument to justify her actions, allowing her to reconcile and restore peace to the spiritual conflict caused by her infidelity. Hence, Anna rejects God as a source of meaning, which marks a significant shift in her worldview. This rejection, coupled with her newfound lack of faith, seems to grant her moral freedom to pursue her desires and carry out her actions with a lack of regard for the consequences. To sum up, these statements encapsulate a nuanced interplay between faith and chance, touching on themes of uncertainty, belief, and the search for meaning in a seemingly chaotic world. Anna suggests that whilst faith and chance interact in intricate ways, neither can fully account for or negate the existence of the other. And despite this reading informed by the work of David West, Alison Taylor contends in her book on Possession that these competing impulses of faith and chance, like the film's other mysteries, should sometimes be left to be experienced rather than to be decoded. After Anna's monologue, Anna returns to their shared apartment and frantically arranges the mess. But her intervention, unlike Helen, does nothing to order the chaos. Even nonsensically putting clothes in kitchen cupboards, the apartment they live in is always in disarray and becomes messier as the film progresses. This can reflect Anna's state of mind and the state of their relationship. Order is only restored with Helen's care. Anna flashes back to a memory where she stands underneath a statue of Jesus on the crucifix. We look down on Anna, casting judgment on her. This is probably the most explicit reference that what troubles Anna is spiritual in nature. Anna whimpers as her plea and attempts to communicate with Christ are ignored. These cries may resemble Christ himself, but also be likened to the Virgin Mary. I want to segue into talking about colour, specifically Marian blue. Henri de Corinth argued that applying a colour theory to something is not unlike attributing a person's behaviour to that person's zodiac sign. And continues that, for instance, in American English, green used figuratively can describe a person who envies another, but it can also describe a person who is naive or inexperienced. Green was often synonymous with selling yourself in parts of the Western world for centuries. Hence, a colour symbolises anything as long as viewers agree on what is signified. Corinth does go on to include a quote from the director in which he states that he doesn't care about theories. According to Corinth, it's not about colour but how the director draws attention to and exploits the location, the city of Berlin, its buildings, public spaces, corridors, etc. He continues, the director draws your attention to the city by clearing it of people, public squares, metro platforms, hallways, city streets, bars and cafes, etc. are almost always empty, when in reality they would be filled with people. That being said, I will be including this segment on colour, but feel free, like I've stated with everything else in this video, to take these theories with a pinch of salt. You can assign whatever meaning or lack of meaning you want to this film. The first thing of note in terms of the colour is that the colour palette of the film is persistently cool-toned. There's an overwhelming amount of chilly blues and greys, most unforgettably in Anna's blue dress. The coolness may define the tone of the film, contrasting against sparser warm tones to create a supernatural atmosphere. The lighting is cold and clinical, fitting for a director detaching and dissecting his own failed divorce, especially as it may further connote coldness in the marriage itself. In the same excerpt included by Corinth, the director explains that blue is the colour of separation, of despair, of loneliness. Berlin is a town in which many things are blue or many things are yellow. And this blue-yellow contrast is the contrast between two apartments that the wife inhabits in the film. She lives in a blue one in which there is separation, and she lives in a yellow one in which she recreates something which is for her, like hope and future. Moreover, in most theories of colour, blue is the colour of rejection and yellow is the colour of passion. Aside from being associated with the character's emotional states like melancholia or of coldness, blue is a rarity in nature. Few plants and even fewer animals are blue. According to the University of Adelaide, this is because most animals don't synthesize a true blue pigment. Instead, they resort to phenomena like iridescence to appear blue. Subsequently, the blue tones lend the film an uncanny and somewhat artificial quality, as if it isn't quite set in reality. Through its use of colour, the film also manages to present the domestic as horrifying by denaturalization of the ordinary. Tiles, walls, Anna's duvet, lamps, carpets are all blue. If we follow the religious tones of the film, blue may be associated with the Virgin Mary, and therefore motherhood. Anna's conservative and monastic blue cloth dress reminds me a lot of the blue cloth worn by children imitating the Virgin Mary at a Christmas nativity play. Marian blue can connote purity, for obvious reasons considering Mary was a virgin when she gave birth to Christ. It can also be considered sacred due to its rarity and associations with heaven and the divine. As mentioned, because of its associations with the Virgin Mary, blue can also be linked to the theme of motherhood, and as a result reflects Mary's virtues, her faith, purity, modesty, and devotion to motherhood. Despite similarities drawn between Mary and Anna, Anna acts as more of a negative double. Anna is, as opposed to Mary, a monstrous mother. For instance, she often leaves her son Bob to his own devices. Anna runs out from the church and towards a subway tunnel, where she wanders whilst holding a shopping bag. This walk through the U-Bahn has become one of cult cinema's most notorious scenes. Having received no salvation from Christ, Anna begins writhing around and thrashing her body against the walls in the tunnel like a marionette. The two sisters, Faith and Chance, now fight for internal dominance. Anna screams in agony as the conflict between the two sisters grow, and her hysteria culminates in her shopping bag, which may be symbolic of Sister Faith, being slammed against the wall, an explosion of her soul. Abject fluids appear to eject and ooze from every orifice of Anna's body before she collapses into a pool of milk, eggs and blood, resembling some kind of amniotic fluid. Sister Faith, as she explains to Mark, was miscarried.
And what was left is Sister Chance. So I had to take care of my faith, to protect it.
With the destruction of Sister Faith, Chance emerges as the dominant force in Anna's worldview. She embraces the randomness and chaos of existence, acknowledging the unfairness and unpredictability inherent in life. As previously touched upon, Anna has now rejected God. And because of this lack of faith, Anna has the moral freedom to justify her more monstrous actions. The lack of faith perhaps also leads Anna to willfully create her own blasphemous monster to worship instead. Rachel Frances Sharp and Sophie Sexton go a step further in their essay on Mother's Milk, Menstrual Blood, the Monstrous Feminine in Contemporary Horror Films, in exploring monstrous mothers and the monstrous feminine. Not only do they define the colour blue as being correlated with motherhood and Marian imagery, but they connect the colours red, white and blue. As always, the obvious, or at the very least surface level connotations of white is that it symbolises innocence, purity and virginity, or something along those lines. Red, on the other hand, is often associated with blood and violence. And in the case specific to Anna, the disorder when the female body transitions from virginity into motherhood. Thus we get this clashing of colours in the tunnel scene, from Anna's blue dress representing motherhood and being a maternal figure, her pale skin and white fluid which appears to be milk, possibly symbolic of her purity, and the bright red blood which may denote disorder and violence, especially as women come of age. As per Sharp and Sexton, this visual clash of colours could signify the monstrous contradictions in this Marian representation. Essentially, Anna cannot exist as these polar extremes at once. She can't simultaneously be a mother, a lover, and a virgin, which may share parallels with the Madonna complex or dichotomy, which denotes the polarized perception of women as either good and chaste as virgins or bad and promiscuous as lovers. So one interpretation is that in this tunnel scene, Anna's internal struggles plays out as these fluids produced in her body, the milky white purity and the contrasting bloody transition from virgin to mother is at odds. Subsequently, the colours highlight the awkward juxtaposition of these three roles. This transition from girlhood to motherhood is also evidenced in the colours found in blood and milk, which may be associated with, in particular, feminine and maternal abject fluids such as breast milk and menstrual blood, as they can be indicators of a woman's reproductive capacity, the monstrous ability to bring life from the internal to the external. Following Anna's confession of the miscarriage, Mark tells her that she looks vulgar for the first time. He proceeds to mention having witnessed the death of his dog as a child. It yelped in terror and felt as though he was seeing something real. This could be why Mark views God as a disease, viewing God as a bringer of misfortune. By likening his dying dog with Anna's miscarriage, Mark is effectively associating this vulgarity with Anna's real and most vulnerable state. Picking Bob up, Mark encounters Helen again. Touching on the idea of blue again, it could be that the film and Anna are always cool-toned and tinted in blue because they are viewed and lensed through Mark's field of vision, and therefore through his blue eyes. Hence it could be posited that Helen is not Anna's literal doppelganger, but her resemblance is because we're perceiving things through Mark's unreliable narrative. In reality, Helen may look nothing like Anna, but in Mark's eyes, because he's still in love with her, like many people do when they're not over their ex, projects his former flame's image onto his new one. There's no confirmation from the other characters regarding her resemblance to Anna, so ultimately this is open for interpretation. Whilst the appearance of doppelgangers are typically met with an impending sense of dread, it's apparent that Helen is a positive force within the film. There is no one way to read this dualism of doppelgangers in possession, but some ideas include Helen potentially acting as the fulfillment of a dysfunctional relationship. Mark can possibly move on with Helen, but draped in white, she is Anna's idealized variant. He clings to this perfected version of his now tainted Anna, who instantly assumes the role of Bob's surrogate mother, diligently adopting this mother-wife role. Helen's saintly existence can also serve as another manifestation of the Madonna complex, where she is contrasted against Anna's adulterous ways. This recurrent phenomenon of doppelgangers, the film's endless divisibility and infinity of mirrors, can be perceived as further commentary on Berlin's physical and ideological divide. Another conception is that Helen exists as a manifestation of sister faith, which makes sense as Anna has now been possessed by Sister Chance and miscarried or aborted faith in the subway tunnel. It also makes sense that whilst Anna's personality becomes increasingly marked by a sense of chaos and madness, that Helen would take on the positive traits Anna has expelled. It's no wonder that Mark would be drawn to Helen, considering she is everything he misses in Anna. Cut to Heinrich's seduction of Anna in her second apartment. Heinrich heads for the bedroom but is horrified to find the creature. The creature has evolved once again, growing to be semi-humanoid, with a mouth and eyes. Anyone that sees the creature ends up going mad, and it appears that Heinrich has become temporarily blind, having caught a glimpse of it. Once Heinrich has regained his sight, Anna reveals dismembered body parts casually sitting in her fridge, a literal skeleton in her closet. Earlier in the film, Heinrich tried to exude an air of enlightenment and liberation, yet Heinrich proves himself to be just as possessive as Mark. He commands her not to resist him and tells Anna he's the only one in her life who has rights on her. Anna wounds Heinrich and makes a point to reveal his contradictions. Heinrich manages to escape and, terrified, calls his love rival Mark. As Bob plays with planes, Margie enters the apartment. Mark asks Margie to look after Bob before heading to Anna's second apartment. The creature is nowhere to be found, but Mark discovers evidence of Anna's horrors, finding the body parts in the fridge. Mark is overwhelmed by the sight and begins gasping for air. The sequence launches Mark into his own descent into madness and transformation. It has been posited that possession isn't just about divorce, but also encompasses the theme of remarriage. To reunite and reconnect with Anna, this transformation leads Mark to surrender himself and ascend to join his wife in her madness. After this metamorphosis, Mark changes his outlook, discarding his attempts to control Anna and aiding her path in any way he can. Mark meets Heinrich at a dingy bar where Heinrich tries to convince him that the creature exists. Mark doesn't believe him and the two engage in yet another confrontation. Mark dispatches and humiliates Heinrich by shoving his face inside a toilet bowl. By doing so, Mark ensures that there are also no witnesses to Anna's crimes. He continues to destroy evidence by going back to Anna's secret apartment and lighting it on fire. When he returns to their shared home, Mark finds Margie stumbling out of their apartment. She dies and Mark drags her back inside the apartment. All threats to their relationship and the social order of their homogeneous family unit have now been eliminated. Heinrich leading Anna astray and Margie attempting to seduce her husband and originally aiding Anna in the cover of her affair. Now on the same wavelength, there is a moment of tenderness between the couple as Anna removes Mark's bloodied shirt. Gleaning religious subtext from this film, this moment is a recurring image in the film where either Mark, Anna or Bob's arms are positioned into a crucifix. Following this, the two become intimate in the kitchen and mentions to Anna that for him, God is still under the porch where the dog died. Given that one of Mark's only previous spiritual insights is the death of his family dog, it seems inevitable that Mark would adopt and embrace Anna's new faith and embrace this link between the idea of deliverance and death. Afterwards, Mark disposes of Margie's body. Suddenly, Heinrich's mother calls about the disappearance of his son. Whilst she's seen his physical body, his mother is concerned that his soul is nowhere to be found. Going to meet Anna, Mark then entrusts Helen with Bob. He finds his wife with the creature, but instead of being horrified like everyone else, Mark is mesmerized by it. As I've already covered, the creature, like other recurring motifs, may have multiple readings. This scene points to the creature's birth being one born out of a love-hate relationship. Just as the creature imparts its monstrous features onto Anna, she imbues the creature to take on the form of her failing marriage. One interpretation then is that the creature can serve as the physical form of a toxic marriage. Especially as Anna and Mark are the only characters not repulsed by the creature, which can symbolize their delirious attraction to their toxic marriage. Despite the state of their marriage, Mark admits without Anna he wouldn't feel anything at all. Possession is the reflection of two destructive people that are always drawn back together, despite not being right for each other. And the toxicity of their relationship acts like a beacon which attracts Helen and Heinrich. Anna then repeats the word almost. Again, the meaning can be multi-layered. It could be because she's almost done with the process of morphing the creature into a doppelganger of Mark, or she could be saying this to Mark to mean they almost made it out to the path of repairing the relationship. Or perhaps Mark's employers have almost caught up to him. In an abrupt cut, Mark is at the door of Heinrich's mother, who is surrounded by Catholic imagery. Lamenting the loss of her son, it appears that to Heinrich's mother, God can only be found in family. Just as Heinrich worships Anna, Heinrich's mother worships him. She winds up taking her own life so her soul can be closer to her son. The next day, Mark is accosted by his former employers. He meets one of them on a bridge where a dog has drowned. His employers try convincing him to return to his old life, which he refuses. He returns to Margie's home where Anna hides. Mark finds his employers, who have been spying on him the entire film and seemingly working with the police surrounding the building. A shootout occurs, but Mark is able to escape up a spiral staircase. On the staircase, as Mark is heavily wounded, Anna tells Mark she wants to show him something. As it turns out, Mark has a doppelganger of his own. This overcomplicates potential interpretations of the creature. To some, the creature is a metaphor representing societal change in Germany, bridging the divide between East and West, and communism with its capitalist future. This could be visualized in Mark and Anna being replaced by new versions of themselves. Taking similar lines of reasoning, it may be that as Anna births this creature, it specifically represents her desire to be a part of the eventual modern Germany. This duplicate of Mark and Helen are identical to their flawed prototypes, except for a couple of features. According to the director, they didn't do the test to ensure Sam Neill's green eye contacts would show up on screen like the way Helen did. He said, "The completed creature should have the eyes of the other woman, the clear eyes of a monster. But they were brown in the film and I hated this." In light of this, the creature's only telltale sign that differentiates it from Mark is its bright green eyes. As for Helen, it's her lighter hair, white and modern attire, and again, green eyes. As the colour green often symbolises envy and jealousy, the artificially green eyes make a note that some of these feelings are at play. Or jealousy from Mark and Anna towards their respective new loves, as both embark on affairs with the other's doppelganger. Aside from their physical resemblance, differences can also be gleaned in the doppelganger's general demeanours. Helen is calm, tolerant, submissive, gentle, and maternal, just to name a few of her positive attributes. All the while, she asks nothing of Mark. She's the ideal woman, the ideal mother, and the ideal housewife. Helen has all the qualities that the irrational Anna lacks. And despite the creature being a threatening monster, it is an ideal manifestation of Anna's projections. The creature is calm and confident. It appears that by engaging in intercourse with the creature, she molds it into a form she most desires, which is ironic considering she tells Mark that her affair with Heinrich has led to a disgust she has for him. Considering this, Anna's idealized version should be the more superior Heinrich. However, I think this can be strong commentary on how dysfunctional relationships work in reality. I think Anna would like to be with Mark, after all there is a fine line between love and hate, but I think their flaws and less than ideal traits, like many people, make a relationship impossible to work. The creature's transformation into Mark and not Heinrich may also double as a comment on not only Mark being what Anna really wants, but that Anna has fallen in love with a monster. As in the controlling and emotionally abusive Mark, not the creature. If the creature is a reflection of Anna's desires, it could be that Anna wishes that her figuratively monstrous husband, like this literal monster, will transform back into a human. That he will somehow find his humanity and transform back into her ideal man. Another consideration of why Anna would cultivate a creature so cold-blooded and monstrous, if this was a projection of her ideals, is because it can further suggest how women, or at least broken women, may have a deep-seated desire to be with monsters. Also, the creature, like Helen, may not exist in its physical form or reality, rather being a product and representation of Anna's psychological state. Whilst Helen may be the projection of Mark's domestic fantasies and desires, Mark, unlike Anna, doesn't have the agency to craft or bring into existence his wife's doppelganger. Unlike the perfect incarnation of Mark, Mark is alarmed as he stumbles upon Helen's existence. As Helen isn't fashioned by Mark, this leads us to question Helen's origin. Despite her green eyes, she doesn't appear to be monstrous in the same way as the creature. They are in some ways polar opposites. She is his antithesis, but their eyes can point to Helen having similar origins. In one previous interaction, Helen tells Mark that she comes from a place where evil seems easier to pinpoint because you can see it in the flesh. She continues, which doesn't mean I admire your world. Helen alludes to the fact that she doesn't come from the same place or the same human world as Mark, making herself and the creature sound like aliens. Helen's mention that she comes from a place where they can see evil in the flesh can foreshadow the creature's actions, giving further weight that they come from the same place, despite Helen lacking the creature's cruelty. At the end of the film, it appears that envy has possessed the doppelgangers, as the ideal versions wind up replacing the now dead couple. The imagery can be applied to the wider context of the wall and the potential envy East Germans had for the living conditions of the West. Another motif is the spiral staircase in Possession, which may represent a stairway to both heaven and hell. Mark tries to shoot the creature, but it is immune. Mark and Anna are shot by the people below. Anna crawls next to Mark and they share a final kiss. In death, they are romantically reunited. Anna takes out a gun and shoots herself and Mark simultaneously through the back, possibly out of guilt seeing that Mark has sacrificed for her. Their lives end in the middle of the stairway, which can be interpreted as a stairway to both heaven and hell. Consequently, as Anna and Mark were unable to ascend the stairs and escape, this doubles as a failed attempt to ascend to the heavens. The ladder may be associated with Jacob's ladder, which appears in the book of Genesis in the Bible. In this description, Jacob has a dream where he sees a large ladder-like structure, possibly a staircase reaching from earth to heaven. The ladder has been interpreted as a conduit between life and death or a path to divinity. It is not Mark nor Anna but the creature that ascends the stairs to heaven. Now that Anna and Mark have died, they are effectively replaced by Helen and the creature. This can connote that the couple have been transformed or even reincarnated into happier, more perfect versions, with their old identities being left behind on the spiral staircase, doubling as a spiral of recurrence. And if the replica ascending the stairs is not divine goodness, perhaps this is Satan, a fallen angel, returning to his banished home. An appropriate parallel for a director banished from his native country for making a film literally called The Devil. After the creature ascends, we see a man pulling up his trousers to reveal pink socks, which had been referenced before. In her book on Possession, Alison Taylor suggests that the director is poking fun here. The pink socks are a joke at the expense of Eastern authorities striving to be Western. Though quite a few people have read this as being related to Mark striving to escape from his role of traditional masculinity. It can reveal that the storyline of Mark's spy work is more a comment on how wider agencies force compliance. Further, both Anna and Mark are striving to break free from these dominant forces and escape from their respective traditional gender roles. For instance, Mark is desperate to salvage the remains of their traditional nuclear family, chasing after Anna despite, at least in the beginning, showing little romantic desire for her. And if the pink socks evoke the sentiment that Mark has a deep-rooted desire to reject traditional gender norms, as pink was settled as the gendered colour for girls in the 40s, it seems appropriate that Anna would be then coded in its masculine counterpart, blue. Aside from melancholy, motherhood and masculinity, blue may also be associated with madness, and by extension, escape. Anna is going mad, searching for escape from fulfilling the traditional role of mother, wife or lover. She engages in affairs seeking this escape, but is ultimately trapped in the role of Heinrich's lover. This idea of blue as an escape or being trapped in a role that doesn't fit can be seen in other media, such as Alice's blue dress in Wonderland or Dorothy's dress in The Wizard of Oz. Anna's desperation to escape this predestined role perhaps drives her to manifest the creature. Therefore, the creature can be a representation of a path towards Anna's freedom to break away from her traditional role in society. However, as Anna tries to break away from her traditional feminine roles as mother, wife, or lover, her controlling husband, also forced to take on traditional forms of masculinity, relentlessly pursues Anna in his pursuit of the perfect nuclear family. Increasingly descending into madness, Anna loses her power and ability to escape the gender role she was assigned, and the creature grows more like her oppressive husband. One view is that despite Anna killing the men who keep her imprisoned, she's still unable to escape her assigned gender role, and thus the creature, already somewhat phallic in form, takes on the form of her husband, which ultimately threatens to hurt her even more than the traditional role her husband attempts to take on. The creature reaches Helen and Bob's door. Sensing a looming danger, Bob pleads with Helen not to open the door. We hear emergency sirens, sounds of enemy aircraft, bombs, and explosions. Emergency sirens are heard repeatedly throughout the background. Even when we are first introduced to the couple's apartment, Bob imitates emergency sirens and plays rescue in the bathtub. The scene has foreshadowed the current situation. Also, as the film progresses, Bob goes from playing with emergency toy vehicles to soldiers and tanks. Bob runs towards the already full bath and decides to drown himself as opposed to being confronted by the evil or manifestation of the world's cruelty. Once again, this could signify the real horror isn't the creature, but the innocent fallout from Anna and Mark's destructive habits. From a religious perspective, Bob's drowning can be comparable to baptism, as water can have properties of purification, such as holy water in Christianity. The purpose of a Christian baptism is to outwardly demonstrate your faith and commitment to God, and also illustrate that a person's sins have been washed away. As a result, it could be that Bob is compelled to desperately drown and baptize himself as he believes that he will be saved by God, or ward off evil by cleansing himself in holy water, especially if the creature is reminiscent of evil or the devil, who is a constant source of temptation in the Bible. His drowning may also be related to the earlier drowning of the dog. Bob's obsession with submerging in water can also indicate a desire to return to the womb. The final shot is of Helen pondering whether to open the door as she witnesses what appears to be the beginning of an apocalypse. This ending can signify a few things. Firstly, it could insinuate that the director had apprehensions about Germany's future, as Helen looks outwards towards some kind of apocalypse or war. It could symbolize that he believed Germany could move towards a country fraught with even more political tensions. He may be visualizing his reservations about Germany's potential as a capitalist nation, despite his simultaneous doubt towards communists in his own country. Helen's naivety can be symbolic of the inability third parties often have in understanding their role as a catalyst in wrecking a marriage. Another suggestion is that Anna and Mark can function normally as separate beings, but their union causes the world to end. They are drawn to each other but are unable to coexist in peace. The interpretations of the ending are quite endless. Finally, this brings us back to the title, Possession. Ultimately, it can denote a lack of self-possession, spiritual possession, or the all-consuming desire to possess another. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think of Possession if you got this far.